Now, the last topic that we're going to talk about is the input devices section, where you can actually handle responses that the participant gives by incorporating script. So this is helpful if you would like the script to allow changes within your input device. And I have a few questions here to kind of just map out what we're going to be discussing and kind of demonstrating. So we have, how can you handle response devices in script? And how can you handle using input mask handling, or if you're using a device or using device handling. So these kind of go together in the sense that you can use script to deal with the input mask handling, or if you're using a particular device, meaning keyboard or mouse, for the response, you can also use script to handle those responses as well. So I'm going to close out of the presentation just to open up the other sample experiment that you should have with your materials. This is the input device sample. So I'm going to open that up, and basically similar to the previous experiment that we looked at, this is set up already for you with the basic instructions telling you that you're going to basically be asked to write some characters, and you're going to respond to a few things that are given on the reply slide is basically where the response would be given by the participant. So it says here, please type some text and then press enter when you're done. So that seems pretty simple and self-explanatory. Now, the takeaway with this section is that the responses given to this particular slide are actually going to be handled entirely by the script. So we have a script placed right after this slide, which makes sense because we want the participant to reply, and then we're going to have the script handle those responses. So before I open up the script and start looking into that, I want to mention that this basically directly relates to an input mask for an object. Now what that means is this object for the reply slide, this is going to be a specific script that directly handles that object. Now you can put things in the user script, which would be conditions that are met globally. And I mentioned this before, but if you go to the view script section, these are those warning messages that we talked about earlier. Now, in terms of the reply slide and the script referencing it, it's very important that there are certain things that are set up globally so that every time a participant responds, the script will be able to handle the response. Some things that are important is that the duration is 0. Now this warning message fires if the duration is not 0. And it says that the inline may not function properly. Now the reason that it says that is because if you're going to have script entirely process the responses by an object, you don't want the object itself to process the responses. Then you will get confusing data because you'll have the object itself logging, what the participant typed, and then you'll also have script dealing with it. So anytime you have a customized script handling, any customization with the object or handling the responses as it is in this experiment, you want to actually set the properties of the object itself to 0. So you'll notice as great practice, I have 0 set for pre-release as well. As we talked about, if there's any script you do not want to have pre-release, because that means when this slide is presented to the participant asking for their input, the inline script would be loading in advance in the background if we had pre-release set. And we don't want that to happen because the script is very crucial for after the response is given, so after this reply slide has been completed. Now with the duration, I have duration set to 0, and that might seem a little confusing that, well, is the reply slide going to even be presented or not? And that actually is all handled within the script that we're going to write. So it's important to have duration set to 0 because this is going to allow E prime to process the response of this object entirely through the script. So that's why we have that important global message in the user script that I mentioned, because we want to make sure that the duration is set to 0. And if there's any changes to that, well, this will fire because of the debug statement that we have in place that we talked about earlier. There's some other warning messages here, and we're going to talk about those when we look at the actual script. So with referencing the object itself in script, it's important to make sure, not only is the duration set to 0, but you also want to make sure that it's very specifically mentioned in the script to where you want E prime to actually gather the response information. Now what that means is if you look at this reply slide, you may think, okay, this box is going to come up, which is going to allow the participant to respond. It's kind of like the Echo client that is available under the advanced properties here. If you would like to show your participant what they're typing, you can do it here. But looking at this, there's actually a couple different text boxes. So we want to make sure that we let E prime know in script exactly where the response is going to be typed by the participant. So I'm going to open up my Save Responses inline script, and the recorded webinars are great because you can have, enough time to stop and kind of catch up and go at your own pace. So we actually would like to type out most of the script today with you. That's what I did in the last experiment, kind of to show you line by line what I'm doing. Now, I'm going to add some script to this. What we have in place so far that you can see deals with the debug statements. So these are what we talked about earlier, kind of just showing the warning messages. And up here in these few lines, it's just basically declaring that they want to assign the stimulus object to reply, that the focal point of the process responses in this particular experiment is going to be this reply slide, as I mentioned before. So that's what the comments say, that if there's any copying and pasting or any changes done, these will all check to make sure that reply is available, and something will fire if the above name is not mentioned. So this is basically just setting up the reply slide. And down here it says if the duration time and the pre-release time is not 0, then this script may not process properly. So this is the warning message I talked about in the user script, where it will actually fire if reply is not set to 0 and if pre-release is not set to 0, which is very, is good practice, because I mentioned that that's necessary for the script to work correctly. So it just says if the response object duration and the response object pre-release does not equal 0, so this right here indicates does not equal, well then that warning message will print out on the tab here and we'll know exactly what is missing. The next bit here talks about in the response action, if the script may not behave properly if these things are not met, and this can cause the object after the script to terminate. So these are just those warning messages, and kind of making sure everything is set up correctly for the rest of the experiment to kind of be calculated correctly by E prime. Now what we're going to do is actually add some script. So I want to go down here to the next. I took a couple spaces just to make it clear to see what we're going to do. Now, with input mask handling, the important thing is to talk about response data. So first, we're going to, with anything, I'm going to make some comments here for you to reference later when you're looking at the experiment or going through any of your scripting. We first want to declare variables for holding the current response count and current response data. Now, what that means is we want to actually declare. So if you remember from our previous example with the summation object, we declared it first. So here we're going to declare the response data as response data. And you'll see that that's allowing me to set that selection. And talking about response data here, I'm going to go to our eBasic help repository that I mentioned has pretty much everything in it regarding script. And when I type in response data collection, there is a huge topic in here talking about the response data collection object. It's derived from the object that you choose, and it basically allows this object to have a collection of information, and is accessed by the input mask dot responses. So you have to set the input mask and let ePrime know that you're looking at this particular object as your input. And here it also mentions device. So if you're talking about, you want the keyboard responses to be the only things that are registered by ePrime, you can use the response data to select keyboard or mouse input. Those are the ways that you can use device handling. But for right now, we're really just looking at input mask of the actual object. So we're just looking at what they type in response to the slide. And then we're going to do some customization there. But I definitely recommend playing around with this topic because there's a lot of information in here about input mask handling as well as Echo Client. This kind of talks about what the Echo Client, what you can basically customize a lot of stuff with the Echo Client as well, which is what will be displayed back to the participant if you would like them to see what they're typing while they type it. So with the declaring of the response data, you can actually see that we can now use this response data as a variable for holding the response information that will be given. So the next slide, we want to actually take that variable. We're actually going to declare another variable. And this variable is for representing, meaning we're going to show the response to the participant. So this is kind of similar to like an Echo Client, but we're going to do it through script. So we're going to declare the strans as string. So you'll see that that recognizes it as well. So this variable, basically string answer, we're actually declaring this variable as a string. So meaning string is the data type. That's what's going to be typed. It's not going to be numbers or anything. It's going to be a string of information. And then we're going to put strans equals, and this just allows ePrime to know that that will be the representation for the subject's response. Now we're going to start with actually doing a pretty large loop. Hopefully you're familiar with loops in coding and scripting. If you're not, of course, eBasic Help talks about loops, and it's a very pretty common thing with script to use a loop, and there's a few different ones that you can do. And here it shows the different ways that you can write. You can do a do-while loop. You can do a few different types of loops, and essentially a loop will basically continuously run this bit of script until certain things are met. So you can do while the reply slide is set to 0, or do until the string response is given. So there's a lot you can set in here, and the loop will, as I said, continuously run in the background with the script that you've set up until those things are met. Those basically the parameters that you set in the loop, until those parameters are met, you can continually run the loop in the background. And we're going to do a pretty big loop right now. And I'm going to first explain what that loop is going to do. So this loop is basically going to run while there are input masks pending. So what that means is while the reply slide, or while whatever input mask you have is pending, it's waiting for a response, this loop is going to continuously check what's going on and what the response is. Now this will return true so long as the time limit has not elapsed. And I hope you guys can see this. Let me expand it a little bit. And we have some other parameters. The max count, I should probably indent. The max, you know what, these are multiple lines of comment, so I'm going to have to do the other option of the asterisk. Okay, the max count on the input mask, and I have S here in case there's multiple input masks, has not been reached, or the termination response has not been accepted. So as I mentioned, there's quite a bit of parameters or different things that need to be met that you can set in the loop. So in this particular loop, we're going to have it continuously run the script while it will be return true as long as the time limit has not elapsed, or the max count on the input mask has not been reached, or the termination response has not been accepted. So these are the different parameters that you can have. And to write the loop, all you have to do is type in do while, and you'll see E prime is recognizing it by making it blue. Do while the response object dot, and then you'll see there's a couple different things I can do with the response object. I'm going to go to input masks. That's what we're focusing on. So do while the response object dot input masks dot is pending. So that kind of explains how it's going to continue this loop until while the input mask is pending, or while it's waiting or accepting responses. And we have a process response sample experiment actually on our website as well, that if you are having something pending like this, it's very crucial that you have the reply slide set to 0, because this pending method is actually what's going to drive or kind of regulate the timing of the input mask. Now the next line is dealing with if the counts do not match, there are responses to process. So this is just letting E prime know that if the response count, meaning what was typed by the participant, does not equal the response object dot input masks dot responses dot count, then we're going to increment response count. And to do that, you just do the response count equals n response count plus 1. So you'll see E prime recognizes that by making this red. And basically what this is saying is if these two things do not equal, meaning if the count has not incremented, then the response count needs to increment the response that's given. And you'll notice that this is actually something that a lot of times people use trial count. You can look into that in the eBasic help as well, that it will basically register. There's a way to set up a trial counter to see how many trials have been set, or how many trials have ran so far. And that's something that you can play around with as well if you're interested in that. This talks about input mask responses. Okay, so with incrementing the counter, that basically means that you're wanting E prime to focus on the current response by the participant. And you'll see that I'm lining this up by indenting each time I type. Whenever, as I mentioned before, when something, you want to look at a bunch of script that is related to each other. So up here we talked about the input mask in terms of the debug statements that we want to run and fire if there's a warning message. Well, for these particular ones, this chunk will be together because it's a loop. We're running this loop will run all together. So we want to make sure that we have the script written together. So this is going to access the current response information so that it can be used later in the script for logging and determining which action to take. Okay, so now we're going to set the response data. You'll remember that we declared the response data as a variable, so now we're setting it as something. This is exactly what we did with the summation object. First we declared it and then we set it. So we're setting the response data variable to the response object dot input masks dot, and then it will even tell you with the drop down what are the options, and with us we want to focus on the responses given, and then we're going to do response count, and then if not, the response data is nothing, then so essentially this is now saying that after we've incremented the response count, meaning that if the counts do not match, there is a response to be processed, and then we're going to increment that by 1 because a response has been given, and then it's going to allow ePrime to know that the current response information needs to be set basically so that it can be used later in the script for logging and determining which action to take. So now we're going to get into the actual logging and accepting the response by the participant and making sure that that's available for our scripting or for our data logging purposes later. To do that, we're letting ePrime know that we're focusing on the response data, the response object input mask, and the responses given to this input mask. And here you'll see that it also explains that this returns the input mask manager that is associated with the specific object. So as I mentioned, we're going to specify to ePrime that we want it to look at the reply slide. And you'll remember up here that the runnable object, the one that we want ePrime to focus on, is going to get this object reply. So we've already basically set that the response object should be this reply slide. So down here now we're actually looking at the information given to that reply slide and logging it. So if the response data is nothing, if not, meaning that if there's no response given, then of course this script won't generate. But if there is some response, then this entire basically verification will happen where it will declare a variable that can be assigned to the stimulus object. So what that means is we're going to declare, using the dim statement, the slide as slide. And you'll see that that's showing here as slide. And we're going to then actually use set the slide, because we just declared it and the next thing to do is set it, equal to, and we're going to use C, which is for casting, and we're going to do cast the slide as the RTE dot get object and then we're going to do the and then we're going to do the reply slide. So before I continue, I want to talk a little bit about casting. It's something that, it's something that changes actually the data type that you would need, or if you're trying to cast something, you can use this, you can look into this topic. So you'll see here that eBasic Language provides for a number of different object data types. So if you're familiar, there's integers, there's strings, there's longs. You can use casting if you need to actually change or convert those data types so that you can do some calculation on those as well. You'll see here that you can actually cast the color and let ePrime know that you would like it to cast it as red. There's quite a bit you can do here, and there's actually a list of casting functions that are available in ePrime. So you'll see that there's canvas things that you can do, as well as casting you can do with the data file. So with us here, we're actually just casting a slide, and you'll see that's there as well. And that's basically allowing that, basically allowing ePrime to know what needs to be referenced here. And with this, we're actually declaring a slide and then setting and casting that slide to be the reply slide. So we're declaring a variable that can be assigned to the stimulus object. So we've declared that there's a variable, the slide, and then that way, once it's declared, we can set that to the reply slide.